Please welcome Mahesh.
Thank you, Ajay. Makes sense. Good afternoon. I hope to not talk for too long because they took my podium away. So, I'm very pleased to be here at ETS. This is my first time in ETS, and I present the U.S. Green Building Council. And for those of you who don't know U.S. Green Building Council, our mission is simple. Buildings and communities and cities will regenerate and sustain the health and vitality of all life within a generation. It took me a while to get used to that mission statement. Now I say it almost 10 times a day. Such a powerful statement. USGBC was formed 25 years ago. And 20 years ago, we established this most popular green building program in the world called LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Simply being able to deliver our mission. We want to transform the places where we live, learn, work, and play within a generation. So having said that, what we have done in the past 2 decades is to be able to drive building energy efficiency and be able to drive sustainability, able to drive resiliency, reliability in the building sector. But then during this journey, we learned that it is important to expand this vision from buildings to communities to cities. And as we are thinking about it, it became very clear to us, a building is as green as the power that goes into it. So we think the opportunity for us to transform the next big sector, which is the power and the utility sector, which is primarily focused on grid modernization and development, is our next big opportunity to be able to drive clean energy, green power, and most importantly, resiliency, reliability, and the customer centricity aspects of a greener, sustainable, reliable development. So we are going to today introduce a film, but before that I want to introduce a new vision, a new partnership, a new language called PEER, the Performance Excellence in Electricity Renewal, almost synonymous with LEED, to be able to help modernize the grid, the smart grid sector, working with the power and the utility sectors. The intent behind this is to drive greater transparency, consistency, common language between stakeholders, which is what we have done with LEED, and replicate that model to be able to drive the next level of market transformation for the power sector. And I encourage you to talk after this film with our team to be able to understand what it can do for the work that you're already doing. And while we are talking about this, it is very important to recognize and realize the leaders who have contributed to this vision in the past few years. First and foremost, we are always grateful to Bob Galvin, who gave us the vision of perfect power almost 2 decades ago. And his sons have handed off this beautiful tool to us as a starting point as part of the Galvin Foundation and asked us to take it forward, to take it global. Because we advocate for sustainable transformation of the power sector to be able to provide access to energy for everyone and everywhere in this world. That is what we advocate for. And they believed in our mission, and they asked us to take this tool and promote it. The second recent leadership that we have seen for the past 3 years in bringing this tool to this level is from SNC Electric, who have invested quite a bit with us, both in terms of their efforts, knowledge, experience, and thought leadership to be able to guide us to navigate the most critical functions of the grid sector. And we are very happy to have their partnership, and we are grateful too. Having said this, what started as a vision a few years ago now has 20 projects going through certification. Some projects have already been certified, some projects are in the process of getting certified, from hospitals to campuses to small microgrids to utilities to even cities. So today you will hear some of those stories during our panel discussion as well as the film. But when we are going through this, what we realized was to recognize a couple of quick, bigger storylines for today. The first and foremost, since we are in Austin, I'm pleased to share the first peer certified project was achieved by University of Texas at Austin, who have actually been the first peer certified campus in the world. So let's give them a big round of applause for their leadership. The second one is much more exciting because they are following the journey what we wanted them to start with. It is the NYU's Longhorn Medical Center actually became the first peer platinum certified project in the world and the first hospital to be certified. Please give them a round of applause. From our experience with LEAD, what we know is that market transformation is not only possible, but is achievable. And it always starts with one project at a time, and most importantly, with one leaders at a time. So today, I welcome you to all to watch this movie, which is all about reliability and resiliency, and most importantly, the leadership of the city of Hoboken, who have actually implemented a very clear public-private partnership with PSEG utility to actually drive the vision for a resilient grid, led by then Mayor, most charming leader that I've come across recently, who is committed to driving cross-sectional efforts to drive critical support services for situations like that they underwent Sandy. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you to join me in watching this film, share your perspectives, and most importantly, I'm welcoming you to the new generation of leadership for grid modernization and development. It is time to take peer global, and it can happen only with your leadership and support. Thank you very much.
Air destruction as far as the eye can see, fires smoldering, some still burning even after the worst winds had passed. Entire lots of homes.
The mayor calls it the worst storm ever to hit his city.
Chairs, you're looking at just remnants of what were homes. Over here, you may be able to see the foundations, but the home itself completely gone.
I can remember within 24 hours being on the phone with President Obama.
One senior said to me, I can't get out, and just literally cried in my arms.
And then I remember getting an email from a parent, but she ended the email by saying, but if we didn't get her house restored by the end of that day, she was going to send her teenager to live with me.
And it just, that for me was really the moment where I felt like we've got to be able to do this in a different way.
And we began losing customers, not a wire at a time, but a circuit at a time. Whether you were the President of the United States or a heart surgeon or a concerned parent, at that point in time, it was urgent. Right? Whether it was just 24 hours, whether it was 72 hours, or whether it was 10 days, enough was enough, and you needed to have your lights back on. So when Hurricane Sandy made an impact, I remember we had a couple of days warning.
I knew that the power would go out.
And I actually brought some clothes to stay overnight in the office.
I knew it would be flooded, so I packed my bags and I stayed here at City Hall.
It was about 6 p.m. and the storm's full fury was allegedly on New Jersey at that time, and we were still in great shape. And I was convinced we had dodged another bullet and we would be okay. Within the span of the next half hour, we lost 90% of our customers.
It was devastating for Hoboken. The water came in from the north and the south and literally filled up like 80% of our city with the floodwaters.
What we didn't realize is that the wind from the storm was not going to be the issue. Typically, that's what knocks down the power lines. The wind from the storm was going to shift the tides, and a lot of low-lying areas, which are important to us from the point of view of where our infrastructure is located, then got inundated.
Our fire station, 3 of our 4 fire stations were underwater, our senior center, our DPW, all of our substations, so the power was out. Everyone's homes, Hoboken is a city where, everyone lives in a garden-level apartment, and their homes were completely flooded.
So the immediate devastation came in 2 forms. Form 1 was the ground was soaked, some trees would come down and take the wires down with them. But more than that, we found literally that our substations had water levels that got into the cabinets, got into the relays, got into the infrastructure, and took out thousands of customers at a time. Some of our power plants, they had a lot of their electrical equipment that converts the output from the power plant to something that can be used by customers, got flooded. So the damage to physical equipment was extensive and took literally days and weeks to recover from. The challenge that has made grid modernization so important is that sea level rise is much more pronounced and is occurring much more rapidly than even some of the early models had predicted. So historically, where did industry and infrastructure develop? It was where you had easy access to transportation. Many, many years ago, it was along the waterways. So much of our service territory has at its core an infrastructure base that's in low-lying areas.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach to a modern grid, but what we do know for sure is that we need to reduce our emissions across the board here in the US and abroad. We need to prioritize reliability and resiliency, and for that, things like distributed energy, local sources of energy, and redundancies across the system, adding in storage and backup generation is absolutely critical to meet the needs of the 21st century. 20 years ago, before the LEED Green Building Rating System was in existence, tenants, owners, architects, engineers were lacking a common language. Many tenants and owners were saying to their architects or real estate companies that they wanted to be in a green building, and yet no one really knew how to define what a green building is. So LEED came around and created a common set of tools, metrics, and guidelines so that everyone could operate from the same playbook and be speaking the same language. And now, 20 years later, LEED has transformed the building sector. Everyone knows that if you're in a LEED Gold building or a LEED Platinum building, it means that you have reduced your impact to the environment across a wide variety of areas. Across the board, everyone wants distributed energy or other types of local sources of energy, or resiliency and reliability, or smart grid, microgrid, all of these things, and yet there's no common language uniting stakeholders around a common goal.
USGBC's peer allows us to compare how we are doing with others in the industry. What can we learn from one another in terms of using customer-centric data to assess performance, to assess how one utility is empowering customers to do things that maybe another utility is not. You know, it wasn't that long ago where in this industry you couldn't pay your bill online.
What PEER does is it demonstrates to customers, investors, regulators, and other stakeholders that an electricity system is performing at the highest possible levels in terms of resiliency, sustainability, reliability, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and everything in between. Hoboken is a perfect example of how a community can utilize PEER to drive outcomes in their electricity infrastructure modernization.
The city is working on many fronts, so we were able to work with the Department of Energy and do an analysis for a microgrid project, and then we were able to get more grant money, and we're continuing to do the feasibility analysis. So when we redid Washington Street, our main street, we put the fiber all the way down so that we're going to be in a place to do the microgrid once we sort of finalize all of the details in the final plan.
They are constructing a microgrid that will layer in local generation and redundancies and ensure that critical services are there for their citizens, even in the case of future natural disasters.
We're also working with PSE&G. So we are raising up our substations and combining the two of the substations together and raising them up. So those projects have begun and they're going to be starting construction.
So some of the characteristics of a grid going forward, I think, should really be viewed across three lenses. First of all, I think the most important thing we have to do is pay much more attention to energy efficiency. So use as little as possible, make whatever you use as clean as possible, and then deliver it as reliably as possible. That third piece is a combination of data management and a more robust, from a construction standard, grid. I think the most transformative energy grid phenomenon taking place right now is the ability to manage data in ways that we couldn't manage data before. If I can understand customer usage patterns down to the individual customer, and I can figure out how to mix and match that, and how to make my grid smart enough so that some grouping of customers can be served with one set of standards and another group of customers can be served with a different set of standards. And I don't just mean in terms of power quality standards, I mean in terms of distributed resources, then I can get to a customer segment of one. And that is very different than the way in which the grid grew up.
The life lesson that was solidified for me was just thinking about the importance of being prepared. Every community really needs to get prepared, think about what is the potential impact for climate change on your community. So that's something that I'm really proud of.
Thank you very much to ETS for making that film, to co-founder Mark Ishak, and of course PSEG and the City of Hoboken for participating in it. I'm Jamie Statter, although you may have gathered that from seeing my face on that very large screen. And we're going to just have a quick discussion here, not only to reflect on the film, but to reflect on Hoboken's experience and how that can inform our larger transition to a more sustainable, resilient future. And to do that, I'm joined by my friend and boss, Mahesh Ramanujan. I'm joined by George Cardenas, VP of Asset Management at PSE&G, and of course, my co-star, the 38th Mayor of Hoboken, Don Zimmer. So I'm just gonna kick us off because again, we're gonna have just a quick discussion here, and I'll start with you, Mayor. As the mayor of Hoboken, why did you decide to take on this challenge to construct a microgrid?
Well, first, I just want to say it's really great to be here with all of you, and I want to thank the ETS for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. It's such an important conversation. So for Hoboken, just to share a little bit more, we're a city of 53,000 people right across the river from New York City, and as you saw in the film, our city was almost completely underwater. 80% of the city was underwater. So I see the microgrid as really an opportunity to be so much more resilient, provide a very important layer of resiliency. And as a small city, we're one of the most densely populated cities in the country, we really can be a model for New Jersey. And I know it's a strategy that PSE&G wants to pursue and perhaps other cities. So just to share a little bit more of what happened during Hurricane Sandy, we almost ran out of fuel. It was very difficult to get fuel for the backup generators for our police stations and our fire stations. So obviously that microgrid could provide an important source of power for critical assets during a storm. You need to keep your community safe. We almost had the pump that pumps 80 million gallons of water. If that pump had gone underwater, then we would have been underwater for about 6 weeks. There would have been no other way to get the water out. So the North Hudson Sewage Authority's backup pump would be part of the microgrid project. We also found that when we kept everyone safe, we had about 5,000 volunteers during Sandy, and those volunteers were actually going and knocking on the doors of seniors and finding out who needed their medicine refilled. So we, the city of Hoboken, provided a backup generator to our local pharmacy so that we could get those prescriptions filled, and then volunteers were taking that medicine back. So we found that we want, as part of the microgrid project, we want a pharmacy to be part of that project. We also had a shelter location. Obviously, there are some places where you're in a garden level apartment, you have to evacuate higher levels. I'm a big proponent of shelter in place in an urban environment, but for those garden level apartments, I did call for an evacuation. You want a place for them to be able to go, and we had problems with our backup generator, so we would want that shelter to be a part of it. We also found that if you can get a grocery store up and running as quickly as possible, you're getting the community back. We also found that the community came together. PSE&G provided a location for everyone to come together in a charging station. We also, our Elks Lodge was a place where there was just lots of cooking going on, and the community was coming in, and our public safety personnel went there to get food to keep everyone sort of going through the storm. So to answer your question, the microgrid really can provide a critical layer of protection for those urban areas that are really at risk of flooding and potentially at risk of, we're all at risk of potentially a cyber attack or something else that really causes that power to go down, and how can we make sure that our communities are safe through the storm or the emergency event, and a microgrid can really be that solution.
So I guess the question is, how do we get this done? We have a really strong idea coming out of something that was a horrible experience, but it has to get to completion. And so curious about you, Mayor, and you, George, how you sort of see the partnership developing in the future, and how do we get it done? Well,
PSE&G believes that inner-city microgrids are a critical aspect of our future. It's important to have a place where, whether it be seniors or other people, can come to and have the benefits of having power. It is part of the future, so we embrace it completely. We worked with Hoboken and Sandia National Park in the feasibility study of the microgrid. We started out with about 70 structures. We have it down to about 12 or 15. The next steps would be to really get the state to work with us to find a way to fund it. And that's the honest truth, and I imagine it's no different than other places across the country. We serve the largest 13 cities in the state, and these are old cities, and these are cities that are all coming back, and we hope to continue, and microgrids within that inner city becomes a critical aspect of those cities coming alive. Hoboken is almost there, and I've talked to the mayor, and I see it in the very near future. We are closely to putting forth a filing with our regulators that includes microgrids for inner cities. Obviously, as I look across the whole landscape in New Jersey, Hoboken is the one that's ready. We've talked to others like Newark, Jersey City, Patterson, but Hoboken has done the homework. I'm very familiar with Hoboken. I went to school there, to Stevens, and I shared before, my grandfather was a butcher in Hoboken till the age of 80. And so I've been going to Hoboken. I live only about 5 miles away, and my daughter now lives in Hoboken. so it's the coolest place to live if you're, she's a journalist. But I'd love for her to have a place when something happens. And people will come out, and they have come out and say, well, you've done all these investments. We've invested about $2 billion in Sandy. Half of that in distribution, the rest in transmission, to eliminate 3 substations, raise 26 substations. The next event is not going to be water. It's more possibly, could be, as the mayor said, a cyber event, some electromagnetic force type event, or as with Sandy, had you asked me at noontime, as you heard Ralph Izzo say, that event was to take place, I would have thought everybody that thought so was crazy. I've worked there for 40 years. I had never, ever seen an event like this. We had faced events where we lost up to 1 million customers. To lose 2 million out of our 2.2 million customers is, well, by far the largest type of loss of our customers in terms of count that we have ever experienced.
And Mayor, from your perspective, what are the key challenges right now? As you've left office and you're sort of here as a private citizen thinking about how to advocate for your community still, what has to happen now?
Well, I mean, I think the key is, for other communities that might be considering this, the key is doing that feasibility and determining what are those critical assets, what needs to be included. And we've been lucky enough to, to work with the U.S. Department of Energy and Sandia National Labs and get additional grant money and keep going with that feasibility process. And, I think the challenge, as George mentioned, is getting the funding. And so hopefully it will be possible for PSE&G to fund this project, because I think it's an opportunity to scale it up and have it apply to other communities as well. So it would help Hoboken, but also potentially help the rest of the state. But if that isn't feasible, I hope that there's also the potential for for the private sector to try and work with the private sector if that is potentially not feasible. Because I think at the end of the day, it's really important that this type of project get done. And as we mentioned, the city of Hoboken, we made the investment. I mean, it's part of the cost of doing a microgrid is opening up the roadway. So we had a major project that we were doing, repaving and putting in new water lines, and we thought, why not put in the conduit now? With the trust that this project will get completed. And finally, I think the peer review process, Hoboken is registered for it. As we go through this process of figuring out what are the regulations that we need to really look at, are there laws that we need to really look at, because we are talking about connecting to the private sector. As I mentioned, the pharmacy is probably the biggest example. I mean, that's important. And how do you make sure that you can do that? So it's not just public to public, it's public to private. As well. So we're really thankful for the process that you have, and I think all of those elements will get this project done.
Well, let's talk a little bit about one of the things you said, which is how we scale an approach like this to other communities. And Mahesh, I think this is sort of your bread and butter, how we take a single project and make it a global movement. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about your vision for this.
I think, as I said earlier, what we have seen with LEED, I keep talking about LEED only because it's a concept. What we have seen with the LEED is that LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. But the emphasis is always on the lead, L part. The L is leadership. So you're meeting two leaders who have actually gone through the experience of an event that I think nobody else has experienced before. The true two people who have experienced are sitting next to us. And I've traveled around the world, and I've seen in the last decade, we have seen at least 2 tsunamis, major hitbacks. My own city, Chennai in India, went underwater, completely unplanned. There was a complete flooding. For 14 to 15 days, we were out of power. In Mumbai, there was no power. During Sandy, you heard from George, 2 million customers of his own just got lost power. When we look at these mega events, it became very clear to us that we need to develop the next level language, next level reliability phenomenon, and actually focus on a sustainable power system. That's our overarching theme. When we did that, the best way that we know how to do this is to convene leaders, is to bring leaders together, is to tell stories like the city of Hoboken, both from the perspective of cause and effect, and really actually have impact on the society too, through personal storytelling, through experience sharing, most importantly, the best practice cultivation that needs to happen around the world. So that is how today we've gotten to 93,000 buildings around the world. 20 billion square feet. We have created $1 trillion industry, but most importantly, we are focused on environmental performance, human health and well-being, and importantly, economic prosperity. When you put these 3 things together, we are talking about people, the quality of life of people, and that can be actually transformed in the next decade only through leadership. So to me, it's about sharing leadership lessons. It's about taking action, and most importantly, stepping up as a leader. So I think that's the best way to replicate it. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you.
The other thing that you always say to us, Mahesh, is partnership is the new leadership, or partnership is the new leadership. I got that right? That's right. He says it all the time, I swear. I'd love to hear a little bit about the partnership. It's not often that you'll hear a mayor willing to go this deep on a very technical issue, and it seems like there's a strong working relationship between these 2 organizations. How can we bring that to other communities as well?
Well, the way you do it is by having projects. To me, in this case, it's to showcase one and say if it can be done here, it can be done in many other places. And to show the regulators, right, and others like ratepayer advocates that this is a good investment. And it is going to be a partnership. It's going to be a partnership between the municipality, between the utility, and between some of those who participate in that microgrid. What I do believe is, as a utility that has been around for 114 years, we will be there even though other things may change. And to include the utility as part of the microgrid process, in both design and operate, ensure that it provides reliability, resiliency, and its use, it's critical to have that partnership amongst all 3.
And Are there other partners that are working with you and the city, Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, so we're involving the stakeholders, the city of Hoboken, the new mayor, Mayor Bala, is really committed to this project, and working with the community and working with PSE&G, and really kind of formalizing a working group to keep. And we have an engineer that's working with us, and really keep moving, because I think it's a critical project, and I think it could serve as a terrific model to help keep potentially the other major cities in New Jersey safe as well.
Well, with that, we've reached the end of our time, and I'll just say for both Mahesh and I that we can't wait to be in Hoboken to present the Peer Certification plaque to you and show how this can really scale to communities all around the world. So thank you both. Thank you, Mahesh, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.